Maybe just before we start the actual program, there are just a few reminders I just wanted to remind everyone of. And that is, again, the Mechiras Chametz forms to appoint me as your agent to sell your Chametz have been sent out. And you can find them in the Kesher email, an earlier email. For those who are coming to Shul, so I would encourage you to come and bring one in person so we can perform the customary kinyan of giving over a handkerchief or some sort of item. If you're not coming to Shul, you can fill out the form. It's a Word document and just email it back. Just make sure it goes, if you don't mind, sending it to myself and to Carol at the office just to make sure we get it. But just please remember to do that. One other just reminder. So there will be both indoor, we are offering both indoor and outdoor davening on every morning of Pesach at 9 a.m. So you'll see the sign up is actually going to go out on Sunday. And if you are planning on attending either of those minyanim, just please sign up. We just want to make sure that we have enough people for both minyanim. Okay. So I'll sort of introduce the evening. Tonight we're going to be hearing Divrei Torah, some personal thoughts, memories from different members of the community, and it's a wonderfully diverse and talented group. And I think each Divrei Torah or thought itself will be really excellent. But I think we're also going to have a diversity of ideas and presentations, and I think it's really going to be really special. And hopefully it'll add to your Seder and give all of us some more things to think about, make the Seder night even more meaningful. And I want to thank everyone who agreed to share something tonight. And we're going to try our best to go more or less in order of the Seder. I know what almost everyone is speaking about, so but I'll sort of call on you. I'll share one thought just to open up the evening. This year, again, everything is different because Erev Pesach is Shabbos, and there are all kinds of complications, and see all of the guides and make sure you're prepared for that. But from the fact that Erev Pesach is Shabbos, there are also a lot of opportunities. We'll all hopefully be well rested for the first Seder. A lot of the hard work will have been done on Friday, and Shabbos we have time to rest. So hopefully that will help us with the first Seder. And also it's kind of special. We're coming out of Shabbos, out of the Kedusha of Shabbos, out of the spiritual mindset that we'll have because it's Shabbos, and we'll transition into Pesach, into Seder from that special day and special mindset. And I'd like to just share with you something from Rav Soloveitchik. I'm going to share my screen and we're just going to read it. I find it to be a really fascinating, just a little passage, and hopefully it'll give you something to think about this year as well. Okay, so hopefully everyone sees this. There's a collection of essays about Pesach from Rav Soloveitchik called Festival of Freedom, and this is from the first essay. And I'm really just going to read it and maybe make a few very brief comments at the end. It's a page and a half. It's not much. This is Rav Soloveitchik speaking. Let me start on a personal note. In my experiential, not intellectual memory, 2 nights stand out as singular, as endowed with a unique and fascinating quality, exalted in their holiness and shining with a dazzling beauty. The night of the Seder and the night of Kol Nidre. As a child, I was fascinated, indeed entranced, by these 2 clear moonlit nights, both wrapped in grandeur and majesty. I used to feel stimulated, aroused, inspired. Illuminating vision heightened my senses, which were sharpened and liberated from all inhibitions. A strange silence, stillness, peace, quiet, and serenity enveloped me. I used to surrender to a stream of inflowing joy and ecstasy. In a word, as a young child, I vividly sensed the presence of God. Of course, it is hard for me now to describe the state of mind of a sensitive child in genuinely childish categories. I'm only portraying, in retrospection, the experiences of my childhood, availing myself of the categories of an adult mind. I can still hear the solemn, sad, nostalgic melody of Yak Nahaz, the mnemonic acronym for the order of the sections of the Kiddush and Havdalah, which I heard most probably at the age of 5, when my grandfather, this is the famous Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, recited the Kiddush on a Seder night that happened to coincide with the end of the Sabbath, like this year. I still remember the finale of the blessing, Hamavdil ben Kodesh leKodesh, who distinguishes between holy and holy. The melody gradually faded away, or shall I say, was transposed into another melody, namely one of silence. As a child, I used to brood for hours over the notion of Hamavdil ben Kodesh leKodesh, two sanctities, one of the Sabbath and the other of the holiday. I liked both. I cherished each spark of holiness. I hated the everyday, the gray, the routine, the workaday dreariness. I always saw in my frail young mother, with her pale face, deeply set eyes, and aristocratic, gentle features, the personification of the Sabbath, of the princess. I saw the holiday in all its glory represented by one of my uncles, an athlete, tall, dark, and handsome. So whenever we have a Yak Nahaz and Hamavdil ben Kodesh leKodesh, I think of this passage, and it really is just a beautiful idea. There's a separation, but a mingling of two different holinesses. And so you can imagine sort of that moment is like the holiest of holies. We have all of the holiness coming together at that point. So this year is in some ways a very special Seder from Shabbos into Pesach. And I hope it will be a very meaningful one for everyone. Okay. We're going to now transition to what everyone really came for, which is hearing Divrei Torah from the members of the community. We have 7 members, and each was told to be not more than 5 minutes long, even though maybe I already broke that rule. But you're not supposed to be more than 5 minutes long, which means that's 35 minutes. So we'll see if anyone has a really brief reaction to any of the people who share something. Maybe we have time for a brief reaction, and we can even have a little bit of a discussion. So we'll see how it goes. So our first person to share tonight is Barbara Gottfried. Thank you, Barbara. And I think at least what you told me, you're sharing something towards the beginning. So if it's okay, we'll start with you. Thank you very much, Barbara.
Thank you. So first off, thank you for asking me to be a part of the program. The line I chose to focus on was once we were slaves and now we are free. And there are many commentaries that describe how we were taken out of the land of Egypt early. And the idea is that we were supposed to be slaves for 400 years, but we are actually slaves for only 210, although you can reach the 400 if you start counting from the birth of Yitzchak. And sometimes the notion of us coming out of Egypt early is compared to a child, a baby coming out of the mother's womb early. And as we know, with babies born prematurely, they come into this world not fully physically developed. But on the flip side, when we left Egypt, Hashem took us out with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. We were physically free, but many Jews still had the slave mentality. Now I'm going to take you back 27 years. My mom, who was young, passed away on Tanis Esther. And it was very devastating and it was chaotic and the whole world was turned upside down. And I'm the oldest and the shortest of 5. And my youngest sister was 8 at the time. And that was the Pesach that I had to make the first Seder. And I wasn't entirely sure how to do it. And my parents had moved to a town where You couldn't really find kosher for Passover items in the grocery store. So I had to drive a few hours away to 7 Mile Market in Baltimore, and I did a big shop. But as anybody knows that prepares for Pesach, you do many shops. So there was a rabbi and his family that were trying to build up an Orthodox community in the town where my parents resided. And so I asked the Rebbitzin if she could please pick me up a few items. And then when I went to pick them up from her home, she was cooking and it smelled like Pesach was coming. And I thanked her for the items and I paid her. I went back to my car and then I cried. And I cried because my parents' house didn't smell like that. And I didn't know how to make it smell like that. And then the first Seder night came, and I sat down at the table with my family, and I opened up the Haggadah, and it was the same Haggadah that we used year after year. And the Seder had order. And even in the middle of all this chaos, with that order came a feeling of peace. And I no longer felt the pain or the struggles from the previous month. It was a gift from Hashem, and it showed me that true peace and true freedom comes from within. So this Pesach, I would ask all of you if to thank Hashem for true peace and freedom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. I think we'll now turn to Tamar.
I'm sorry, I'm a little emotional from the beautiful Devar that Barbara you just shared. That was really so beautiful and so personal. And I'm taking that to heart. Like, we are living in a moment of chaos here. And so thinking about the order of the Seder. So thank you for that. So I'm going to go into, I wanted to focus on the Arba Banim, on the 4 sons. And I do kind of have my Gateways hat on with this piece. And so I'm going to just reflect on a few things that, a few learnings that I discovered when kind of looking at the story of the 4 sons with through the lens of like a disability inclusion lens. And so there's an organization called Ale in Israel that works with people with disabilities, and Dov Hirth at that organization, he had a whole learning where he quoted Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau, the former chief rabbi of Israel, who explains that the word echad, one, is used when introducing each of the 4 children to show us that every single person around the table is equal to one. Every person, from the wise child to the so-called wicked child, we're all counted as one, we're all counted as peers. So no matter what our background, our age, gender, education, ability, we're all equal. We're all members of the family and part of the Jewish nation. I thought that was really beautiful. And I kept, just looking around and just seeing what was out there. And then I stumbled upon this beautiful Dvar from Rabbi Miriam Spitzer, who I never heard of her. I don't know who she is. But then I read a little bit about her, and she was actually one of the founding members of JSEC, Jewish Special Needs Collaborative, which was one of the 2 organizations that merged to become Gateways here in Boston. She's no longer in Boston anymore, but she's a conservative rabbi who I believe just took a job in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And she talks about the Haggadah in this section where it starts with, this section starts with Keneged Arba Banim Divrei Torah, that is usually translated as the Torah alludes to 4 children, but she says perhaps it could also be rendered as the Torah speaks against the notion that there are 4 children. Keneged meaning against, that you can't just categorize people into little pigeonholes. Like, we are all different, and there aren't just maybe 4 prototypes. And so she goes on, and 4 children were at the Seder, and we all take it for granted that one was wise and one was wicked, one was simple, and one did not know how to ask. But then she uses the analogy. Imagine if a parent declared, I have 4 children. This one is the brain. This one is the troublemaker. This one's the dope. This one, he never talked. We would never say such a thing. We would never let a teacher say, get away with saying, I have 4 students, the brilliant one, the idiot, the loudmouth, and the one who never says a word. We would never we don't talk that way about people. And so perhaps what she goes on to say, perhaps the Haggadah deliberately provides caricatures of 4 types of children to teach us something about the care we must take when we answer a question. That each person at our Seder is coming from a different place. This one is older and more experienced. This one had never been to a Seder before. The other one was sick and didn't expect to be at a Seder and was unprepared. So there are different ways that we can look at how we think about the story of the 4 children. And then I'll end off with one last learning, and this is from an organization called Matan, based in New York, that does a lot of professional development around special needs, education for special needs children, and they're really a wonderful organization. And so one of the founders of that organization, Meredith, I'm blanking on her last name for a second, but I'll make sure to write it in the chat so I acknowledge her appropriately. But Meredith says that the 4 children provides an opportunity to talk about modern day labels and how we think of people with varying strengths and weaknesses. Can any child really be summarized with one label? And can any individual be described so concisely? Wise, wicked, simple, not knowing how to ask. And so advocates for children with learning differences or anyone with special needs often talk about a people first language. So we don't say an autistic child, we say a child with autism. And when we refer to children as children with learning disabilities, but not learning disabled children, the difference may seem slight, but when we use the people first language to recognize the whole person and not identifying that child or that person by any one particular ability or disability. So that's how we can think about what the story of the 4 children of Pesach are teaching us, that they're really parts of a whole. And so I going back to Rabbi Spitzer for a moment, she said that by telling us the story of the 4 children, each with a distinct question and each with a distinct answer. And the Haggadah is telling us to accept each person where they are and to begin from there. The questions that are asked must be addressed, and the questions that are not asked must also be addressed. And that each one of us contains aspects of each child. Each one of us is sometimes wise, sometimes wicked, sometimes simple, and sometimes silent. We all have those moments where we're inhibiting one of those characteristics. We are the 4 children, and as such, we ask questions and we provide answers, different answers for different needs. And then I'll just make one plug for Gateway, that we do have the Gateways Haggadah, which is really amazing because I looked at it and it's really it was produced for children with varying different needs. And the part on the 4 children and the Gateways Haggadah, it's supposed to relate to, where you really would read this with a child and say the first child felt excited about Passover and what the child might feel about Passover. The second child felt upset about Pesach and didn't like these special occasions. And the third child felt confused and did not recognize the things that his family used on Pesach. And the fourth child just felt overwhelmed. The Pesach is full of so many new routines and foods and objects. And it goes on to describe each way that you might want to interact with a child going through some of those emotions. So I just love that there was so many rich and different ways of looking at this, outside of the more traditional and midrashic kind of commentaries that we use. So I leave you with those thoughts, and thank you very much for letting me be part of this and inviting me.
Thank you very much, Tamar. Yasher koach. Steve, are you ready? Okay.
Yeah, here I am. All right, Rabbi, thank you. So first of all, thanks for the invitation to share some thoughts tonight and everyone's patience with me. Barbara, that was really beautiful what you said earlier, and Tamar. So anyway, this may not be so good by comparison, but I just want to share some thoughts of all the mitzvot that are attached to the Seder. I think the meta mitzvah is that we experience Yetziat Mitzrayim as if we were leaving. It's not like a story that happened to somebody else and we're having, it's kind of interesting. We're supposed to relive it. Now, there's a certain absurdity to that if we're trying to relive the Yetziat Mitzrayim, Avadim Hayinu, and we're thinking ahead as to what will be in the tea room tomorrow, and we're wondering as to whether how we get the wine out of a silk tie or a silk blouse. It's a sort of an absurd contradiction. Last year, however, was I think we were able to fulfill that mitzvot, right? Because I think about the first Pesach, it had to be a terrifying night. Death was racing rampant throughout Egypt, and literally on the other side of every door, the angel of death was out there. And I think we all had that feeling last year. If we prepare, think about preparing for Pesach last year. If you went to a store, maybe you went really late. Maybe the butchery stayed open till midnight the week before Pesach, or Stop and Shop or Shaw's was open late. You went into the store, it looked like it had been looted because the shelves were empty. And when you came home for that first night of Pesach, and you closed the door behind you, it was a lot of fear as to what was going to be on the other side of the door. And I really wonder if how many people went to shul that night. When you open the door for Elijah, when you do it normally, it's like, oh yeah, we're opening the door for Elijah. There's this cup of wine. Oh, will he come in? But how many people, when you open up that door that night, it was with a lot of consternation, uncertainty as to what would be on the other side of the door. So anyway, this year is different, right? We've been through what was, pretty awful year and very awful for an awful lot of people. It's not like that first Pesach, I don't think, but it's certainly not like being in the Bamidbar or in the Promised Land. I was trying to think of what this Pesach is like, and probably standing at the sea, and maybe it's starting to part. The maritime equivalent of the vaccine. But most of us haven't gotten the vaccine yet, and we really don't know how long that'll take and the herd immunity and this and that. And maybe it's like standing at the sea, and it hasn't parted. Maybe it's starting to part, but we certainly haven't crossed. And again, I think this year gives us that rare, maybe unwanted, but that rare opportunity to experience the Seder as if we truly were Avadim Hayinu, leaving Mitzrayim. I guess the one hope I have about this is that the authenticity of the experience, we never forget it. I mean, it really brings great meaning. But I also hope we never have it again, because I don't think any of us want to relive this year. But anyway, I hope, Rabbi, thank you for the invitation. And my hope is that everybody, everyone has a truly meaningful and hopeful holiday beginning next week. Anyway, Chag Sameach, everybody, and an early Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Steve. Yitzi, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you, Rabbi Hellman. This Torah took its initial form back in 2005 while I was a student in Rabbi Horowitz's Machshavas Yisrael class at YU. If you don't know him, he is a genius. And it's slowly evolved ever since. So as the Haggadah leads up to the essential retelling of Yetzias Mitzrayim manifest in Seu Lamad and Arami Oved Avi, it answers the unasked question of why tonight with the paragraph that begins Yachol Me Rosh Chodesh. One might have thought the Seder and its mitzvah of Sipor Yetzias Mitzrayim should commence on Rosh Chodesh. Talmud Lomar, the Torah tells us, no, Bayom Hahu, it has to be on that day. And matzah umar munachim lefanecha, when matzah and umar are placed in front of you. One obvious question is, what is the Haggadah thinking? Really? Yachol Me Rosh Chodesh? The Exodus was still 2 weeks away. What was the Havamina? Why would one have thought that Rosh Chodesh would have even been an option? So I never really considered this question until 2006, when at MIT Hillel, Rabbi Gershon Siegel quoted an answer in the name of his Rebbe and father-in-law, Rav Aaron Soloveitchik. Yachol Rosh Chodesh, we might have thought the Seder should be on Rosh Chodesh, because that is when we got the first mitzvah, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. We might have thought that the thing to celebrate is the spiritual exodus that comes with receiving commandments from Hashem. Talmud Lomar Bayom Hahu. We cannot ignore the physical redemption, physical freedom, which is necessary to properly observe the mitzvos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The question that remains, though, is what is the true significance of this first mitzvah? HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, Rishon Hu Lachem L'Chodshei Hashana. When the first Rashi in the Torah says that this pasuk was the runner-up for the first pasuk in the Torah, we get the sense that this mitzvah must be something very profound, a blockbuster mitzvah. Yet at first glance, it's only Rosh Chodesh. What is the true significance of this first mitzvah that might have been the first pasuk and might have kicked off our annual Seder every year? Most answers to this question that I've seen focus on the establishment of the calendar, its centrality to our entire religious life, and the fact that the events of this month are so momentous. But I suggest another possible understanding of the circumstances of this mitzvah based on what it entails, when it was commanded, and the Rambam's theory of prehistoric religious development. A long time ago, not in a galaxy far, far away, for those who know me, the Rambam says in the beginning of the halachos of Avodah Zarah, man made a grave mistake. Man looked up at the planets and said, those planets are on a much greater level than I. They have a closer relationship with Hashem than I. Let me use them as my intermediary in dealing with God. To make a very long story short, a combination of human forgetfulness and other factors led the people to forget about God and only recognize the heavenly bodies as having control over the universe. This lasted until, as the Rambam says, until Avraham Avinu recognized the folly of Avodah Zarah, became the first Jew and the father of the nation that will forever symbolize a rejection of Avodah Zarah and a belief in monotheism. Yitzchak and Yaakov, his children, continued the family tradition of following Derech Hashem and the mitzvos of Abraham, until, as the Rambam says, Ad she'orchu hayamim liYisrael b'Mitzrayim, until the Jews extended their time in Egypt, v'chazru lilmod ma'asehem v'lavod avodah zarah kamosam, and they relearned the ways of Avodah Zarah. V'ha'ikar sheshasal Abraham ne'akar, v'chozrim b'nei Yaakov l'te'os ha'amin. They uprooted the monotheistic teachings of Abraham and they returned to the mistake that had misled all the nations. Bnei Israel were on such a low level that they were only redeemed because of a promise made to Abraham and the Kiddush Hashem it would be to have a nation as an Or L'Goyim. The first mitzvah the Jews received as they were leaving Egypt was Kiddush HaChodesh, to look straight back up at the moon, but with a totally different perspective. High tide aside, the moon has no control over the universe. Its path is completely predetermined. On the contrary, we now control the moon. Based in puts the final stamp on any new month. God took the moon, a representative for all the planetary bodies, the cause of the greatest mistake the world had ever known, and made it the backbone of our calendar so we can remember the rebirth of our nation, where we're coming from, and where we're going. Now, this idea is, I also found lately, connected to a larger literary tension in the Haggadah that relates to Machlokas and the Gemara Pesachim. The Gemara says that when retelling the story of the Exodus, Maskal B'Gnus, Messiah B'Shevach, when we discuss the redemption, do we just look at the story of the Exodus, where we were slaves and now we're free, or there's a machlokas, maybe we should look at just that, or we should look at the larger arc of history, the initial start of idol worship amongst our forefathers and the eventual transformation to a monotheistic religion. So while the practice of our Seder is definitely that our Seder takes place, it's helpful to keep the other options in mind. when as we go through the text.
Yasher koach. Thank you, Yitzi. Sarah, is now good or okay? You can have an assist from Gavi.
The Higata Levinka came a little bit early and a little later at night than I would have preferred, but here we are. So what I'd like to share with you tonight is about Eliyahu Hanavi and opening the door for him. This really ties in beautifully to what Rabbi Hellman spoke about the way that the Rav viewed Pesach when he was a child, because Elie Wiesel, scholar and author and a master storyteller, talked about in very much the same tone how Pesach had such a special meaning to him. And so tonight I want to share one of his Pesach memories with you. He remembered Pesach much like the Rav from his home in Siget, with this idea of wonder and like miracles. On the night of the Seder, he wrote that his father was a king and his mother was a queen, and the poor people of the town were the most sought after and honored guests. And he tells the story of this, what turned out to be his last Pesach in his childhood home in Siget. And this story starts out with Elie Wiesel in a very bad mood. Elie was upset that his family hadn't found any guests to have to the Seder that year, and he was preparing for the Seder with more than a little frustration. Finally, everything was ready, and to his delight, his father came home with a surprise guest, but immediately the family knew that something wasn't right. The man didn't seem to want to be there at all, and he insisted that he wasn't hungry, which culturally we still know is just, I can't even imagine. And more than that, he was stooped, he spoke with a Polish accent, and he was dressed in rags. And every step of the Seder, this guest would interrupt and beg the family to pause recounting this story from thousands of years ago and listening to what he had to say about what was happening in Poland right now. But his anger and his intensity scared them, and Elie Wiesel's family urged him to let them just continue the Seder and they'll talk afterward. Finally, it came time for the traditional opening of the door for Eliyahu Hanavi, and the guest could contain himself no longer. He jumped out of his seat in front of Elie's sister as she went to go open the door, and he flung it open himself, and he said, "See, he's not there, he's not there." And with that, he ran out into the night, leaving the door wide open, and no matter where Elie and his family searched that evening, they could not find him. And I'll just quote this little paragraph of what Elie wrote about this. He said, "It was not until later that I understood that he was the prophet Elijah. And if he bore little resemblance to the Elijah of the Bible or the prophet of my dreams, it is because each generation begets a prophet in its own image. In days of old, at the time of the kings, he revealed himself as a wrathful preacher, setting mountains and hearts on fire. Then, repentant, he took to begging in the narrow streets of besieged Jerusalem, to emerge later as a student in Babylonia, messenger in Rome, beadle in Mayence, Toledo, or Kiev. Today, he had the appearance and fate of a poor Jewish refugee from Poland who had seen too close and too many times the triumph of death over man and his prayer." In this unique year, Eliyahu Hanavi, who takes the shape of our own generation, might be hard for us to envision. I was thinking about this today, like, is Eliyahu Hanavi at Fenway, like getting his first shot of the vaccine? Is he celebrating the freedom of the Agunot who were released from their bondage in the last 2 weeks? Is he sitting with the mourners of the terrorist attack in Atlanta? Where would Eliyahu Hanavi be today? Because he'll show up like we show up, and he will suffer what we suffer and celebrate what we celebrate. This year, whoever among us merits to see Eliyahu Hanavi will see a human being wrestling with great complexities and facing uncertainty. We'll see someone who has weathered a great storm and, as Steve said, is still weathering it. But we'll also see hope. We'll see a prophet who's hungry for connection and community. We'll see empathy for others and a new appreciation for advantages that maybe we took for granted before. And we'll see an Eliyahu Hanavi of action and hope, looking forward to a better year to come.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Also beautiful. Each Dvar Torah has been amazing. Thank you, everyone. William, and then Morris, you're going to be closing it out for us, okay? William, are you ready?
I hope so. Rabbi Mori, as Many of you are familiar. The Haggadah is just it's a parak from Mishnah Pesachim, or at least Magid is basically a parak from Mishnah Pesachim, and it's said that there's this nice compendium of all of the psukim that are contained in the Talmud, and this compendium is called the Tanakh. And excuse me, sorry. And the Chazal who wrote the Mishnah, who wrote the Haggadah, knew the Tanakh far better than we do. So there are two interesting allusions that I found. One of them are two psukim from Sefer Yechezkel, and one of them is from Sefer Yoel. In Sefer Yechezkel, there are two psukim that we quote backward. We quote in inverse order, which are Ve'avor alayich ve'erech mitposeset b'damayich ve'omar lach b'damayich chayi ve'omar lach b'damayich chayi. I passed by you and saw you downtrodden with your blood, and I said to you, with your blood you shall live, and I said to you, with your blood you shall live. Yeravab ketsemach hasadat itatich v'tirbi v'tigdeli v'tavoi ba'adi Adayim Shadaim Nachonu Use'arech Simeach Va'at Arum Ve'eryah. Sorry. Myriads like the plants of the field I have made you, and you have increased and grown. You have come with perfect beauty, breasts fashioned and your hair grown, but you were naked and bare. Now we quote on the Haggadah, we quote them in reverse order. What's very interesting is the Yechezkel goes on to discuss this maiden of Israel who grows up initially basically in the arms of Hashem, but grows up to be a harlot and spares nothing in describing it. I'm not going to read much of the rest of the parak. I would encourage all of you to learn this, just like I would encourage all of you to learn the rest of the Tanakh, but it's actually scary and sobering to read. At the very end of the parak, Yechezkel says, quoting God, V'kimoti ani et briti itach v'yadat ki ani Hashem. I shall establish my covenant with you, and you shall know that I am God. And speaks of forgiveness. But I think that makes us look very differently at those two psukim that are actually a remez to that whole parak than just a reference to this young maiden of Israel. Something else that I found that was very interesting in Sefer Yoel, right before the 10 plagues, we quote this pasuk from Yoel Perek Gimel. V'natati mofetim b'shamayim va'aretz dam v'esh v'timrot ashan. And I will perform signs in the heavens and on the earth, blood, fire, and pillars of smoke. The next pasuk I find actually even more interesting. Hashemesh yahafek lechoshak v'yarech ledam. Lifnei bo yom Hashem hagadol v'hanora. The sun shall turn to darkness and the moon to blood prior to the coming of the great and awesome day of Hashem. Well, when does the moon turn to blood? That's a total lunar eclipse. And doing some research, the next total lunar eclipse that will be visible as a total lunar eclipse in Yerushalayim will be the middle of Elul in 4.5 years. Not that I'm saying that we should assume that Mashiach will not come before then, but God willing, he will come by then, and if not by then, that as well, he will come. Of course, it would be wonderful for us to open our doors and see Eliyahu as the Navi describes him. Thank you very much. Yasher kochachem to everybody who spoke. Shabbat shalom and Chag Kasher v'Sameach.
Thank you very much, William. All right, Maris, you said you have two stories for us.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi. So the rabbi asked for some personal experiences and maybe some of the cultural traditions that we shared in my home. Growing up Sephardic, so we have this custom to well, first the two main goals for Pesach is one of what Steve said is to that you should make like you are the one that's leaving Egypt. You should transpose yourself to Egypt, and you're going free, and you're becoming freedom, and you're going on your way to Har Sinai. So that's one of the main goals. The other one is to involve the kids in the Seder, very important. So one of the customs and traditions we had in our home is that you take a sack and you throw it over your shoulder. So you take the sack, you throw it over your left shoulder, and you say in Arabic, it says, Minfen Entagaya, where are you coming from? I'm coming, you answer, Mitzrayim. And everybody answers, where you're going. Excuse me. Lefen Entaraya, LeYerushalayim. So you bring it around to the right, and then it goes to the next person. Minfen Entagaya, where you're coming from Egypt, and where you're going to Yerushalayim. So the couple of things I noticed about that is one, where you're coming from the left. They put it on, they make sure to tell you put it on the left side, because the left side is judgment. And where we're coming from pretty harsh judgment in Egypt. And where you're going to, on the right, is Rahamim. We're going to Yerushalayim. So we're going from a judgment to mercy. And so the other thing is that, the sack that you're throwing over your shoulder, how do you get all the kids involved? Well, because that sack happens to be the afikoman. And I can guarantee you, every kid at the table was paying attention, was following the bag of the prize. So everybody gets a big prize, whoever finds the afikoman. So they would watch where the afikoman was going, and somehow it would get hidden, and everybody would end up looking for it. So that's my story of a Sephardic cultural Pesach. And the other story that I want to tell you that I enjoyed was from a line in the song that we sing in the Haggadah called Dayenu. Everybody knows Dayenu. And Dayenu means it would have been enough. So there's a line in the song that says, I'll say it in English and Hebrew, he had brought us to Mount Sinai and not given us the Torah. It would have been enough. Dayenu. So Ele kirevinu lifnei Har Sinai v'lo natan lanu et Torah. So I ask you, how is it possible that it would have been enough when we go to Har Sinai and we don't receive the Torah? Our whole existence is the Torah. Life without Torah is like a fish out of water. So how is it possible that they tell us that, oh, it would have been enough? Because the whole thing is for us to be able to transport ourselves to Har Sinai, because Har Sinai was a very special place. Bnei Israel was on the 49th level of spirituality, and in Har Sinai is where they received Matan Torah. So Har Sinai, Bnei Israel had the zechut. And it was, by the way, we say, I left Egypt, not they left Egypt. So it's I, not they. So you're bringing yourself over there because on Har Sinai was on such a high level. And so we're trying in Pesach with all the simanim on the table. You have the charoset, it's bitter. You have the maror. It's, look at any good Pesach Haggadah would have, the charoset and the stains all over the Haggadah. So it knows that you use it. So what we're saying is that what is so great about being at Har Sinai, because Bnei Israel had this zechut to be in the presence of Hashem, and so it's what we aspire to do is to elevate ourselves to such a level so we can be also going when we're on that high level to Har Sinai and experience what it's like to be with Hashem. And those are my two stories for short, quick. My friends told me just to make it like Kiddush Club Divrei Torah, and you'll be fine. So that's what it is.
Thank you very, very, very much, Mars. Is there anyone here who wants to share something that wasn't on the program? I'm offering. We have a few minutes. Okay. Well, unless someone starts speaking, I'll just conclude by saying that I was just thinking, reflecting based on the Divrei Torah of some that were shared, and really thank you everyone who volunteered or who agreed when I asked them to share, even on relatively short notice. And really, they were really beautiful Divrei Torah. But thinking about the difference between this year and last year that some people brought up, honestly, I had forgotten how bad it was last year, exactly at this time. I kind of knew or remembered, but, as people start talking about it, I was really remembering really how bad and how scary it was. And it's easy to forget, even just after a year. And, we thank Hashem that we really are in a much better place now. Again, even with whatever challenges remain, we're in a much better place. We have a lot to thank Hashem for. And I don't know about you, I thought just hearing everyone share Divrei Torah, see people come together on Zoom, this is really a really wonderful way to get into the Pesach spirit and to approach Pesach with even a little bit more simcha and more joy. And so I thank everyone who shared something, everyone who came, because I thank you for myself. You're putting me in a better mood to get ready for Pesach, and I hope this was an enjoyable, meaningful get together for all of you as well. And we should all have Chag Kasher V'Sameach. We should have wonderful, beautiful Sedarim with whomever we're sharing them with. And everyone should have a wonderful, wonderful Yantiv and a Chag Sameach. So thank you very much, everyone. If you want to unmute and say hi to anyone, say good Yantiv to anyone, feel free to do so as well. All right. Good night, everyone. It's great seeing you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.